My guest today is Seeyew Mo, the Assistant National Cyber Director for Workforce Training and Education at the Office of National Cyber Director in the White House. Seeyew, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much.
There's so much to talk about the cyber workforce. The efforts, the initiatives have just been really building up over the last few years. It started back obviously with the National Cyber Strategy in March 2023. A couple months later, we had the National Cyber Workforce and Education Strategy in July. Among those goals include expanding the pipeline for cyber workers by reducing barriers and improving the efficiency of the federal hiring process. I know more than 35 agencies take part in working groups, have begun implementing strategies, objectives to really improve the workforce and education. So that's where we're going to start. Tell us the latest with what's going on with the National Cyber Workforce Education Strategy.
Yeah, for sure. I think we ought to take a step back to realize how important and monumental this National Cyber Workforce and Education Strategy is. In fact, it is the first strategy of its kind that takes a whole of society approach to make sure that we are not just, filling seats today, but also making sure that our cyber workforce is built for the future. We have had a lot of successes in the past year. What I would like to say is that we have commitments from private sector to hire 20,000 people for in the next few years to fill these positions. The federal government, we have served more than 13,000 apprentices in cyber apprenticeships. And we have over $95 million investments by private sector actors, as well as hundreds of millions of dollars by the federal government supporting apprenticeship. So we're taking this whole of nation approach because we know that while the government can do a lot, we need no single actor has the silver bullet to solve the problem. So we're pretty proud of our work. There's still a lot of work to be done. But from ONCD standpoint is to make sure that we have some form of a federal cohesion to solve this problem. For a long time, cyber workforce policy and work has been done among the national security folks, and ONCD has been partnering with our interagency partners, not just from national security, but also making sure that the national security folks are working closely with Department of Commerce, NIST, NICE, Department of Labor, so that the cyber workforce is a priority in any sorts of workforce investments that the federal government is making.
You mentioned this hiring, the need to hire is great. I think I read in the strategy something like there's 500,000 open jobs, or will be 500,000 open jobs. And what a cyber worker is also changing. That definition is changing. So let's start there. The need is always growing, and how's the workforce strategy at least starting to address that need? Because usually there's no silver bullet, as you said.
That's right. So cyber workforce is no longer the guy in a hoodie sitting in the basement, hacking and defending, drinking Mountain Dew or Diet Coke, your choice of your soda, right? That's not the case anymore. So we took a very deliberative approach in the cyber workforce to make sure that we're expanding the definition. A lot of people don't realize that the strategy itself is not the national cybersecurity workforce, it is the cyber workforce, because we know that more and more jobs will require digital skills, and then more and more work roles will have some cyber elements in them. When I'm talking about the law enforcement people who needs to investigate cyber crimes, we consider them a cyber workforce, or the procurement officers who are trying to purchase and understand the requirements for cyber contracts, right? So the definition is a lot bigger. So what are we doing now is we want to be hyper-focused. The strategy has a lot of strategic objectives and whatnot, but the way we take it is, if you dial it down, there are three imperatives. The first one is we need to broaden the group of people who are interested in doing cyber work. So that means we need to reach people that we haven't been reaching. People from the rural area, more women, more underrepresented and underserved individuals, folks from different regions of the country, right? So that that's why the National Cyber Director has been traveling to different regions of the country to kind of bring the cyber gospel, right? The opportunity for all these good paying, meaningful jobs that not only let you get by, but also get ahead to the folks who might not consider a cyber career. The second imperative is that we need more people to access those skills and training. That's why we are going to community colleges and universities, as well as working with our partners to make sure that these trainings are broadly available. That's why we work with Department of Labor to invest in apprenticeships, so that when the Biden-Harris administration is investing $440 million in apprenticeships, cybersecurity is a major component of that, right? The last I checked, a little bit of money out of $440 million is still a lot of money. So I think that's an advancement and an achievement in itself. And finally, we need to make sure that people regionally and locally are taking the initiative, right? The federal government, we can kind of set the direction, but really it requires a lot of public and private partnerships, and that's what we call the ecosystem approach, and which is why when we talk about successes, we can talk about what the federal government is doing, but oftentimes we also need state and local government to be doing that with us, the private sector, nonprofit, academia, and labor organizations.
I never thought about it in this way, but I'm glad you highlighted. We don't call it the National Cybersecurity Workforce, but the National Cyber. And I think that's a real important recognition in just how much cyber has really permeated into everything we do. You mentioned procurement and law enforcement as two great examples. Financial management, you can go through healthcare, exactly.
Advanced manufacturing. If you think about all the investments that the federal government is making right now in the Investing in America agenda, a lot of all these investments require two things. Number one, cybersecurity, to make sure that these investments will be secure, right? It will be unfortunate if we have to go back 20 years later to have to retroactively fix the cybersecurity component of this, right? So we are making all these investments now. Let's not repeat the same mistakes again.
You're being very generous 20 years later. How about 2 years later?
2 years later,
yes.
Right? Yeah.
That's the way cyber moves. But
yeah. And the second component
yep.
is workforce. We need the people with the skills and the training to be able to do the work. That's how we've been approaching the implementation of the strategy, to make sure that we are attacking the need for cyber workers today. And the one thing I would say is this. A lot of people throw around the 500,000 numbers. Like, to be fair, we do that too, because we do that because we want America to know the enormity of the problem, but also the opportunity. But I just want to caution that that number will fluctuate. More and more technology will be digitized. Hence, we're going to need more and more people. So, I just want to caution that we don't track progress using that number. That's sort of like not the right way to measure. What I would sort of say is we should use that number as a way to think about it as how big of an opportunity is for those who are looking for a cyber career, and also for the government policymakers. It's like, hey, we better start stepping up and working together, or else this problem will continue to grow.
The opposite is also true on that 500,000 number, and only because I think we're seeing this in the federal government. The people who said, oh no, I'm a cyber worker, the 2210 series,
Yep.
I know we'll get into this in a little bit. Oh, wait a minute, but I'm in finance. Oh no, I'm a cyber worker now. Or, hey, I'm in procurement.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm a cyber worker now too. And I think that's going to grow, which is going to either grow that number, or B, actually have more people fill in. And I think you're starting to see that. And I think that's also important to recognize that as we change the view of what a cyber worker is, the numbers will fluctuate, to your point, and also we'll have a better idea and a better understanding of really what is needed in each of those roles.
Which leads me to sort of like one of my most passionate topics on workforce, right, is why we are pivoting our thinking towards, instead of like putting people into seats, into thinking about skills, right? There's a method to the madness here why we're focusing on skills, right? The reality is we need more and more people, regardless of what your title is, to have certain sets of skills, right? So this is why we've been pushing so hard on the skills-based approaches, right? This is just not about skills-based hiring, which is one way to look at it, right? Skills-based hiring is, I have a cybersecurity position right now, perhaps I remove the degree requirement and just evaluate someone with skills, and then we hire someone into that cybersecurity position, right? If we do that, that's a success in itself, but that wouldn't solve the long-term problems that we have. The long-term problems that we have is more and more Americans needs to have some form of cyber skills, right? So that's why in our strategy, we focus on equipping every American with foundational cyber skills. These are the skills that, if you know how to use the technology on one end, you know how to use on the other, right? You recognize patterns. You can analyze actions and the consequences of the action digitally, right? So that's like foundational cyber skills. And then once everyone has foundational cyber skills, then we can kind of teach folks to do additional, industry-specific cyber skills, and some of them may be cybersecurity, right? The high-end pen tester, red team, blue team, that kind of work. But by and large, you need people who have, policies in another area that we need cyber, people with cyber knowledge, right? Cyber skills. So that's the thing, right? It's a mindset shift that we have to take. That is when we focus on skills, we then realize that, wait a minute, when we look at the organization, we will see what are the capabilities and the skills that we want to build, and then figure out how we can fill those skills. Do we retrain people? Do we upskill people? Do we hire people with a lot of high-level technical skills? Or do we have more entry-level skills, right? That it opens up a lot of possibility. In some way, it is the money ball for cyber workforce. It's the secret sauce, I would say, is how we would like to solve the problem. It's the money ball approach. It's no longer about the people with the most technical ability. It's a combination of the abilities that make sense.
I love the analogy. If folks maybe aren't familiar with the Moneyball approach, it's all about the baseball, how the Oakland A's back in the 1990s. It's a great movie, Brad Pitt, you got to watch it, right? Always make movie references, and the young people on my staff look at me like, what movie are you talking about? So,
I feel like I'm dating myself now.
We are dating ourselves, absolutely. Let's delve into the federal government specifically, because obviously for our audience, and they want to know what's going on. So the cyber workforce strategy and education strategy really outlines a lot of efforts by agencies, and really to make it easier. So let's start with that skill-based hiring approach. We know that's something that's being pushed across the government. What is happening with ONCD, and how are you all kind of promoting this concept for specific cyber workers in the federal government?
So not only we're promoting it, we are taking actions. In April, acting OPM director, right, announced that OPM will be embarking on an effort to transition the 22 occupation series. And for those, I'm sure all of our audience knows, but it's the IT specialist 2210s, right? And the 2210s, some estimates about 70-80% of 2210s have some form of cyber roles in them. So we thought that it's a good occupation series to kind of run a pilot, get it working. So they are working on transitioning that into skills-based approaches. And that should be done sometime next year. And, since we are, on a forum talk about federal workforce, and we ought to think about like, hey, this is actually not as easy as turning off the switch, right? Or turning on the switch in some way. We have to think about what does it mean to qualify, what does it mean when someone is qualifying for the job, right? This is a qualification policy. And then we need to know how to classify them. Once someone has the job or got the job, we want to place them, we need to pay them. How do we classify someone if we no longer have some of these degree requirements or experience requirements, because we're using skills-based now, right? And then finally, how do we do skills assessments, right? So ONCD, together with our EOP or White House partners, are working very closely with OPM, Office of Personnel Management, to make sure that we are framing this and shaping this and taking the appropriate steps so that we can do this in a way that achieve our goal. We have to remember that these are policies that affect real people's lives. We have to get it right. So we are coordinating very closely with them in this regard.
I'm going to ask you, because you mentioned next year. Next year could be fiscal year, next year could be calendar year. Do you have a sense of which next year we're talking about yet?
It is by the end of the next fiscal year.
Okay, so end of next 25.
Yeah.
So there's some time left. So okay, because I know folks will be asking that question too. Is wait a minute, which next year did he talk about?
It's only a difference by 3 months, though, I would say.
Well, it's an important 3 months, right? So you mentioned that you guys are working together. The idea of these skill-based hiring is really a focus on, okay, what certifications you have, but what education.
That could be one approach.
But on top of it, right, is the workforce, if you will, what have you done previously in your career to develop those skills? How difficult has this been so far? What are some of the things you're seeing around moving to a skills-based hiring approach? What are the big challenges?
this is where we rely on our subject matter experts in the federal government, right? There are a lot of sort of like steps that we have to take, right, to make sure that we cover all the cases that you have mentioned. What I have learned so far is to get it right, we need to take a very measured approach, right? That's why we have met with OPM and other White House offices a few times now to kind of make sure that we have a plan in place. We're going to continue to push forward for their implementation. What I have learned is that, hey, if you want to make big and challenging changes, it takes time, and we want to pick the right solution. That's what we're going to continue to focus on.
And I think the point of getting it right, because you're affecting people, right? Policies always affect people, but workforce policies, pay and benefits policies,
yes,
that gets much more personal to each of us. And why did you get a job, not me? I have a 4-year degree, you don't. That's not fair. It's definitely a culture change that you're asking. So the other piece of that is I think the inventory of cyber jobs.
Yep.
That's because that's related, because that's also going to understand what's going on. ONCD's obviously another partnership there. Talk a little bit about how you're getting to that inventory. Where are we at today?
That's one of the most common questions that we have been asked, right? ONCD, as part of the implementation of the National Cyber Workforce and Education Strategy, ONCD is partnering with OPM to sort of like get sort of like an inventory of cyber jobs, and we are starting with the 2210s to kind of make sure that where we get a sense. We do know now that there are about 3,000 jobs or so that were open in 2210s for FY24. This work is we're continuing on this work, and we want to make sure that we're getting these things right. What we plan to do is, using this information, we would like to socialize it more with the interagency to figure out how we can work together to fill some of these roles in a more efficient manner.
And the 3,000 jobs, that's job openings.
Job openings.
Right, not total roles. There's
right,
tens of thousands of people who hold a 2210.
Yep.
And those 3,000 jobs are cut across, obviously, all the
different
agencies.
departments, all different agency departments.
Right. And different pieces and parts of what's
That's
considered cyber, for going back to our earlier part of the definition. Is this something, as it comes up, that you'll be working more closely with agencies to help fill those roles? I mean, it goes back to the skills-based hiring, goes back to the broader conversation about upskilling, reskilling, training.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. We have to solve this problem in many, many different areas. One of the areas that we're focusing on is we'll be launching an engagement and hiring and recruiting sprint in the fall to make sure that we can start filling some of these positions. There are still a lot of decisions that have yet to be made in terms of like what positions that we want to focus on. But now that we sort of know hey, there are some openings, let's try to fill them. A lot of times in workforce policy, we want to adopt best practices and sort of see what works and what doesn't work, right? As I mentioned in my previous sort of like statements publicly and whatnot, Tech2Gov, which is sort of like one of those successful events that OPM has put together with the interagencies to hire tech people in the federal government, we have extended offers to over 100 people, right? So we're going to continue to try out these different things to try to kind of like make progress in terms of like putting people into positions and join the federal government. At the same time, we will also making changes on the policy side to make sure we're making the necessary changes to facilitate, more flexibility and whatnot in the future.
My colleague Joy Heckman has done a great job of covering the Tech2Gov efforts. I know you testified before the Hill earlier in the summer and said something to the effect of you mentioned over 150 people were hired. Yeah. I know that's a common term that's been thrown around. So obviously very successful. And the sprint you mentioned is, I've heard from your former colleague who spoke a couple months ago, Jake Braun.
Uh-huh.
And he mentioned this is kind of something to follow on from, I guess, April when you did a sprint, or earlier this year when you did a sprint?
The April is the Tech2Gov.
Tech2Gov, okay.
Right. So we're going to have an upcoming Tech2Gov at some point. But we're going to have a larger sprint this time. There's more than just Tech2Gov.
Okay.
We're going to have an engagement campaign to make sure that we are also engaging with private sector employer to encourage them to hire interns, registered apprentice, as well as entry-level folks, so that we can just get more people into the national cyber workforce in general.
And again, the people who maybe I don't have any skills, I won't apply. Yeah. Actually, you do have it, and here's why. So I think that's the engagement piece is so important. Let's talk a little bit about, so we talked a little about skills-based hiring, we talked about the cyber inventory of jobs. There's a bunch of other things that the National Cyber Workforce Coordination Group, the Federal Cybersecurity Working Group are working on. Are there a couple examples that come to mind of how this implementation is going? And is any examples you want to share about kind of the impact that it's already having?
So one of the major things that we're running this group is that we realize that people are just not talking to each other, right? A lot of departments and agencies are doing really, really good work, and we ought to be able to learn from each other and share best practices, right? So if you look at the Tech2Gov, using that as an example, is because we have the working group, we were able to make sure that we hire from a pool hiring action, right? So we share the certificate, a candidate goes through the process, now the candidate is available for multiple departments and agencies, right? So that's like one good outcome on some of this work. The other work is we can coordinate better when we are trying to hire folks. ONCD has put together a couple of career fairs. We know that the great people at NICE and the CAE program have some career fairs that are coming up that we would like to cross promote. Same with Scholarship for Service. They have some career fairs that are coming out. So when we kind of put people together, we're able to talk to each other. The one thing that I want folks to also understand is that this is not just about interagency conversation. This is also about conversation that can happen within an agency or departments as well, right? Oftentimes, you have folks in CIO who might need talent, but they might not be working as closely with the Chico folks. They might not be working closely on the programmatic folks, right? So by pulling all together, we can kind of say like, hey, wait a minute, we cannot do this unless we have the budget for it, for example. So all this conversation is what this is facilitating as on top of the information sharing and the coordination of actions that we can kind of do to implement this strategy.
People underestimate the importance of that pooled hiring actions. I think we've seen it in other non-IT or non-cyber world. Data scientists, I think it was a good example, AI experts as well. From your experience with the pooled hiring, is that, one, it makes things easier, but two, what's the bigger benefit than just speed? I mean, is it a feeling that agencies, we're on the same team, we're trying to all find the best versus against each other, like, oh, no, I'm going to hire that person before you will?
Well, and then there's also the alignment on the people that you really, really need, the mission critical positions that you want to fill, right? A lot of times when we run the pool hiring action, we pick positions that a lot of departments and agencies need, and then you kind of get the benefit of everyone sort of like, hiring at the same time. You get the benefit of marketing. The last thing that we want is for candidates to have a bad experience, right? They go through all this process and suddenly they don't have a position to be placed in. By having sort of like more chances in employers, then you have more marketing, lead to more candidates. And then because it's pool hiring, we were texting our HR professionals quite a bit as well when we're running all these different sprints. So it's better for us to kind of work together so that hey, to the extent that we can actually share resources, take actions together, have something to focus on. And with a goal, right, with a date, that's what makes it work.
What you've been describing is really a major culture shift across the government. So let's delve into that a little bit. One of the things ONCD can do from the, I'll use the term bully pulpit, maybe you won't use it, is to really get agencies to move in that right direction. You mentioned about coordination better. You mentioned the part of the pool hiring is the marketing together. We're all hiring for the same person. Let's give that person a great experience. Do you find that's really the key from what's happening from the strategy on down, that you're able to kind of marshal the resources and really drive some real culture change versus, well, we got to change because if we don't,
Yeah, I mean, what I like to tell my interagency partners, and you can talk to them, is that, hey, I'm here to make sure that the good work that they are doing gets elevated. Like, I really believe in that. I really believe that departments and agencies are doing a lot of good work. And then by being able to elevate that good work, that's a kind of incentive to make sure that everybody kind of works together. And look, this problem is not going to solve itself. The longer we wait, we have a lot of questions being asked from Congress, a lot of questions being asked from everybody. So unless we work together, we're not going to solve this problem. I think there's incentives already. Like we're there to provide the forum and build the infrastructure for progress to be made.
Are there certain steps you're taking or certain ways that you can kind of get folks to see past the culture that has to change? Meaning, well, I've always hired people on my own. Why do I need your help? Or well, if we're both competing for Mary or Tom and they're A plus, why should you get the A plus person and I shouldn't? Why should I be settling with the B plus person, right? Is that part of the discussion you have to have, and how do you get folks past it?
So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to grow the pie, right? Instead of going after the same small group of top talent, we're trying to make sure the talent is bigger. And a lot of conversations that we have had in terms of what ONCD has been doing is we have been linking the cyber workforce needs with the overall president's agenda, right? So we think about how we want to grow the pipeline. We are linking into the Biden-Harris administration investment into registered apprenticeships, for example. We're linking it to the Technology Innovation Partnership run out of National Science Foundation, right? In which they invested in the Augusta region to make sure that there's a workforce that will be very capable in the future in that region, right? So what we are doing is we're trying to make all these connections, all these dots, and tell folks that, hey, the trick here is we're going to grow the pool. We're going to do it together. It's no longer about just you doing it for you. It's about let's just all do it together, grow the pool, and then we have all these small little things that we're doing to kind of fix the experience, even for the hiring manager, to the HR person, to the candidate.
OPM recently put out this fascinating dashboard of time to hire, and specifically they talked about not just across the government, but they talked about specific mission critical jobs. Cyber was one of them. And it was good to see that the data is out there that now you can kind of pay attention to that. So as you talk about the candidate experience, time to hire is really important.
Yeah.
By the time I offer you a job to get your, to start, if that's too long, especially cyber folks, that they're going to be picked up more quickly. The other side of the coin, of course, is, hey, I'm a current federal employee. What about me? Mm-hmm. What are you doing for me? You keep talking about recruiting, retraining, retaining. What about the retainment side? So there's a move also to upskill, reskill current federal employees. I think this is where the inventory also comes in.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about where ONCD is seeing the upskill, reskill.
So OPM has the rotational development program today, right? You will have to talk to them about where the program is, but we know that that's an opportunity for folks to try out new experience, learn new skills, try a different role by rotating from their home agency into another agency. That program just kicked off this year, right? So I suspect that we're going to continue to improve on that and make sure that folks have more and folks have opportunity. I also know that there is a bill going in Congress right now on the Federal Cyber Workforce Development Institute about a report that ONCD would do. All I can say to that is, if you read our strategy, it is mentioned in the strategy that we do need some of a way to upskill and reskill the federal workforce. We just need to kind of more the pieces to be in place before we can make a move on that.
And I think you mentioned the couple different pieces that could come in place. In the meantime, you can't just sit there and wait, right?
Yeah.
Like it's always the same thing as things evolve. Is the conversations you're having with, you mentioned the collaboration side, bringing people together, is that part of the working group discussion, the council's discussion?
That's right.
Okay, what are you doing for your people today? How do you make sure that they have the right skill sets?
Well, we have to start even more basic than that. Is we actually are working with OMB to make sure that we're pulling some of the data on some of the workforce initiatives and whatnot so that we can get a better sense of what everyone else is doing. It is, we don't want to just dictate what the right or wrong solution is from the White House, right? I think a lot of times, like I mentioned before, a lot of good work happens at the departments and agency level. Sometimes we just don't see them. So that's why the very first step that we're taking is working with OMB, trying to get sort of like the data call, as we call them, on some of the workforce and education initiatives that are ongoing, so that we get a better sense of where things are before we make a decision on what to move next. And again, when we talk about workforce policy, it's about people's lives, right? Even reskilling, retraining, when someone is, retrained and reskilled to a different role, that might affect their pay. That might affect, their position. Right. So we don't want to do some of these changes, without considering all the different options.
Part of this, I think, discussion, and you're kind of alluding to it, so maybe is the harmonization of the initiatives. You mentioned that. There's also harmonization of investments. What's the role ONCD is playing when it comes to the B side of OMB? You mentioned the M side, but are agencies investing the right money? How much money? How are you able to help them kind of see, hey, don't don't underinvest in training because that matters, or don't underinvest in the recruitment or in retention pieces?
Yep. Well, on the workforce side, we talk to the B side pretty often to make sure that we share with each other some of the upcoming programmatics and some of the things that we're thinking about. But on the ONCD side, is that our director, right, National Cyber Director Harry Coker Jr. also do a priorities memo for cyber with OMB Director Shalanda Young on an annual basis, right? So that's one of the primary way for us to sort of shape the B of the budget to make sure that folks are investing and making the necessary investments to invest in their workforce, to hire within the workforce. This year in the memo, we make a major push on more skills-based hiring, sort of like more investment in skills-based hiring and making sure we're removing barriers, right? It's what we have in the memo today.
I was just going to ask you about the memo, so thank you for answering my question. We know agencies are very busy putting together their 2026 budget requests. I was lucky enough to read Circular A11. Don't get me started on my excitement over that. We've talked a lot about what has been working and what has been going on. I'm going to ask you to look forward a little bit as we head into 2025, fiscal year 2025 and calendar year 2025. What are some of those priorities, initiatives? What should we expect from your office around the workforce?
For sure. I mean,
nothing stops. We get that.
Nothing stops. But when it comes back to it, it is always about implementing the president's national cybersecurity strategy, which the National Cyber Workforce Energy Strategy is part of it, right? ONCD is here to solve hard long-term problems, that haven't been solved long-term. And workforce is one of them. We're going to continue to push for more skills-based hiring and general skills-based approaches. We're going to try to engage with the private sector so that we can bring them along on this journey. And then one of the key things is we're going to make sure that Americans see themselves in cyber careers. I don't know what the right solution is on there. I'm trying many, many things. So if any of our audience have any good ideas, I encourage them to let us know or take actions in their home departments or the agency or even in their own organization, just because we need the people to do the work, to defend our nation, and also to make a good living.
You bring up 2 points here that let's hit upon in the last maybe 10 minutes we have together. Okay. The first is the agency side. You do a lot of work with agencies. You've talked a lot about that connection, the coordination. What do you hope that they're taking from the cyber workforce strategy? What do you hope, it's a big document, there's a lot going on. If you would point them in a couple directions, I won't say one because one's hard, but what do you want them to really kind of focus on and really try to, okay, how can we get the most out of it? Not the strategy itself, but the results.
I don't know if I can kind of point, it's a lot.
Right.
But what I want to, if there's one thing is, I want, and a lot of departments and agencies are already doing this, is that we have to work together. If you look at the list of things that have to be done, unless we work together and start prioritizing these things together, it's not going to work. So that's the one thing that I would remind everyone to be mindful of. Just because, if you start looking into, is it about funding? Is it about skill space? Is it about hiring processes? Is it about investing in cyber clinics or education? Or is it there's just so many different things, right? So I think by pulling together, we get further. And I think by focusing on having some successes now, which we're starting to see, it builds confidence. And then we can all work together for bigger and better things in the future.
Do you get a sense, given that this effort now is pushing year and a half or so, July was the year with the workforce strategy, that agencies are seeing themselves differently in terms of how they work together and the importance of, again, all kind of marching in a very similar direction. Have you seen a change over the last year?
Absolutely. I see even more engagement now because folks are starting to see some of the changes that we are trying to institute together, right? Trying to make sure that everyone play together in a way that benefits all sides. So the answer is by far yes. We started with one coordination group, one working group. Now we have one coordination group and 3 working groups covering 3 different parts of the, 4 different parts of the strategy,
Just real quick, I'm going to go through, if you can, off the top of your head, what the 3 working groups are.
Yep.
Do you remember what they are?
So yeah, for sure. So there is the National Cyber Workforce Coordination Group. So that's the coordination group that's at the Assistant Secretary's level or SES level that kind of oversee the implementation of the whole strategy. Then we have the Federal Cyber Workforce Working Group, our most mature group that is implementing policies for the federal government. And then we have the Working Group on Education and Workforce. So that is about engaging with education and the national workforce.
In the private sector,
in the private sector, academia. And then we have another working group on skills and awareness, which is the pillar one, equipping every American with foundational cyber skills, and then making sure that more folks are even considering themselves to consider themselves in a cyber career.
And those coordinating councils, those workforce, that's open to mostly federal employees. That's who's leading this effort. Labor Department with the apprenticeship side, or
that's right.
NIST on the NICE effort.
NIST will be NIST NICE. In fact, we work together with NIST NICE and sort of like co-chair the workforce, the working group on education and workforce. Right. I think the key here is, I think you asked, just to go back to the previous question, is the key here is collaboration. Right. ONCD is a small office that just started 3 years ago. Right. And yet we have multiple products, including the National Cyber Workforce and Education Strategy. And yet we are making progress, right? You know, a lot of people are talking about the vibes check, right? I feel like with the vibes is like we're making a lot of like progress, not because we're doing it ourselves. It is because we know that there are some things that are really, really good. We're elevating them, and then some things that needs to be done, and we're trying to figure out how to prioritize those using working groups and coordination groups to get them done.
It's great to hear that the vibe is much different today than it was a year ago. You expect that. Are there still challenges, roadblocks, obstacles that you see that we have to kind of address? Is there anything that you feel like, hey, here's the next thing we need to do to continue to raise the level?
I think a lot of people know what our priorities are. We just want to make sure that we work together to have the resources to do the work, right? There's a lot of, we just need to plan, right? A lot of things is not because we don't want to do it, just like we haven't been able to plan as appropriately. And, I think now that we have 1 year under our belt, right, we're starting the planning for next year a little bit earlier. We're working with the agency. We realize that, hey, maybe we're doing too much. Maybe we need to kind of be more focused. I feel like it's more like we need to learn from what we have done in the past year, improve it for the next year, and then, maybe I'll be back next year and talk about it for the year after.
We'd love to have you back next year. We're already planning it. And I'll say this because you won't, is also you need Congress to get on board with the funding issues. I know that's always a challenge when it comes to any sort of training, upskilling, reskilling, workforce side. You can dip into it or not, but I know that resource piece is people, but it's also money. I know that. We
will continue to engage with Congress on this important issue. I think a lot of times, even during my testimony, I make sure that the congressional members on the committee understand that these also mean jobs in their districts. I think we have an enormous opportunity here to have a generational shift, to get more people into these good paying, meaningful jobs that also protect our country. I think one of the things that I want to repeat, I know that there's a federal audience, is that a lot of the cyber jobs are also in private sector, in state and local government, especially some of the, jobs in utilities, healthcare. Those are not federal jobs, so to speak, but we need cyber talent there too. So unless we grow the pie, we're not going to have enough people to do the work, both for the federal government and for the national cyber workforce.
And what we've seen during the course of the pandemic and this idea of remote work, agencies are taking advantage of being able to hire in other places. We don't need everyone in Washington, D.C. or in Seattle or Denver or Boston, wherever there's big kind of areas of federal employees. An office that's in San Diego could hire somebody in a remoter part of California and still get the same production, same productivity, and the same benefit, yet they can find people. So I think cyber matters here too, is the same type of thing where you have to, again, see yourself in cyber and then apply for those jobs.
That's right. It's like a remote work as an economic policy, right? Which is like making sure that, folks in Pennsylvania and folks in Texas and folks in Georgia also have the opportunity to do some of this work. But of course, there's always differences in agency policy because of their mission criticalness, or, some of them you need a SCIF. So that might not be possible for those agencies to actually allow them to work from home. But we have a lot of opportunities here. We're exploring a lot of those with our partners and agencies. And I would say it's not just on federal government, it is also on private sector as well, right? One of the things that we have been pushing for too is military spouses, right? We know that a lot of spouses follow their partners all around the country every 2-3 years when they get deployed or move and whatnot. We want to convey that cyber jobs and cyber career is a way that they can kind of keep the same job as they move around the country or even around the world, right? And a lot of times, like private sector might have more flexibility, but that's just to speak like, hey, we have an opportunity here. A lot of people can get benefit from this, but also we as a nation need these folks on board.
There's a handful of jobs that you'll always be employed, right? Nurses, doctors, healthcare, all those teachers.
Yeah.
I think cyber has fallen into that. You always have a job if you are in cyber. And that actually brings us around to another piece that I know there's been a focus on, and we've seen this from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and others about neurodiversity.
Yes.
And the people with neurodiversity and the role that they can fill in cyber and other technology. That's another big focus area, not just for the administration, but for a lot of agencies as well, specifically around cyber.
And CISA have a program now, it's some form of a internship program for some of the neurodiversity individuals to sort of do some of this IT and cyber work. It is reported in our initial implementation report. Again, like I said, we like to highlight really, really good work done by departments and agencies. In this particular instance, CISA really have done a tremendous job in setting this program up, right? I think a lot of times, what it boils down to is, are we removing barriers and broadening the pathways enough to meet folks where they're at to get them into these jobs, right? Unfortunately, it's not one barrier, and unfortunately, it's more than one pathway. So if you look at the totality of our work, you can kind of see when we have commitments, what the commitments are. It's about internships. VA is starting to register apprenticeships for veterans without college degrees, right? So that's another example that we like to highlight. That's what we're doing as part of this whole of nation effort here to implement and get more people into these good paying, meaningful jobs.
And you're not going to grow the pie unless if you look at new people, different people that maybe, again, non-traditional people who've looked at for cyber. Do you get a sense that the neurodiversity, people with neurodiversity push is growing across government? CISA's internship is a great example. I mentioned NGA. Are you seeing more and more agencies either starting something or start asking a lot more questions about, hey, how can we kind of take advantage of this opportunity?
I have engaged with departments and agencies on this topic. I think folks are definitely starting to ask some similar questions. In fact, ONCD is also working with some of the folks behind CISA's program, as well as with Department of Labor, to make sure that if we are thinking about any policy changes or programmatic changes, what would it be, right? I think that's in itself should signal to you and to your audience that we care about these type of issues. We want to make progress. You might not hear about the work until things get announced or released or whatever, right? So we have a lot on our plate. We're trying to make progress on all fronts.
Right. The last few minutes we have together, the other side of the coin, of course, when we talk about federal employees, is contractors.
Yep.
I know there's a push, the Department of Energy, as an example, is adding some changes to their contracting requirements to say, hey, can we hire skills-based there too? Talk a little bit about how ONCD is working with either energy or whomever about kind of the contractor side.
That's right. So Department of Energy make the announcement as part of the White House convening that ONCD hosted in April. What we have done is, I personally have actually talked to the Chief Acquisition Officer Council about the need of removing some of these barriers. ONCD is currently coordinating and working with OMB on sort of like the best path forward. We're in discussions with multiple departments and agencies to sort of see what are some of the opportunities to actually have some quick wins so that we can kind of build some successes, right? And one of the things that I want to highlight is there's actually some commonality in the federal workforce side and the contracting side, is that as we sort of like try to remove these barriers and pivot to skills-based, we essentially need to think about how do we do assessments? How do we do qualification, right? In the federal government, how do we do classification? So there are elements that we can kind of work together and share so that folks don't have to feel like they have to do it all by themselves, because we know there's a big change. How do we assess someone's skills for contracting? Well, how do we assess someone's skill for federal cyber jobs, So let's align all this stuff in a row, right? That's why OMB has been a tremendous partner, OPM has been a tremendous partner and a lot of different agencies as well to make sure that we're doing it right, because people's livelihood is at stake.
What was the reaction from the CAO Council? I know you'll tell me they loved it or they hate it, you're not going to tell me anything bad, but generally speaking, did you get a sense that they're open to this idea, that they're, I never thought of it that way? Just give me a little bit
I think people want to do what's right.
Well,
I think, you know,
hope so.
yeah, people want to do what's right. And then the more I talk to folks, the more I understand that, you know, when you are in different spaces, you have different consideration as well as risk that you have to think about, right? So as part of like me telling them, I'm also learning from a lot of folks about what are some of the risks, right? And what are some of the stuff that they have to deliver as well. So, you know, we're not always right, you know, we get that. And
I think a lot of it is they have to get their head around it. We talked about the culture change earlier. I think that's part of it. And when you talk about acquisition, and there a lot of people in acquisition, as you may know, are rule followers, right? Well, the FAR says, so I have to follow the FAR. So I think that's why I was kind of trying to see if you got a little bit of, was it hot or cold or tepid or?
The thing is, the FAR is on our side in a way, right? Because the FAR essentially sort of said like, hey, no minimum education requirement, right? That's in the FAR itself unless it's really necessary, right? So, but the thing is, we have to have some success stories. I think that's what it comes down to. The more success stories that we have, the more implementation and results that we can have that we can measure, it builds confidence, right? And that's the focus of a lot of this working group. It's like, hey, what are some of the successes that we can do so that we can all work together, have some successes, and build on top of those successes in the future.
And I think that's the key point. Find the successes and continue to build. And I think that's a great last word I gave you there. So Seeyew, we're out of time for today. So let me thank my guest. Seeyew Mo is the Assistant National Cyber Director for Workforce Training and Education at the Office of National Cyber Director in the White House. Seeyew, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
I'm Jason Miller, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on Workplace Reimagined.